ہے گیر ہائے کس نے اسے زنجیر پہنائی ہوگی رسن ظلم میں ننھی سی کلائی ہوگی. صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وعجل فرجہم. جب لٹ کے کربلا سے اسیرے ستم چلے، سجاد سر برہنہ بدرد و علم چلے، روتے سروں کو پیٹتے پابند غم چلے. زینب نے لاش شہ سے کہا بھائی ہم چلے، زینب نے لاش شہ سے کہا بھائی ہم چلے. مرنے سے آپ کے میں یہ ایذا اٹھاتی ہوں، دربار میں یزید کے سر ننگے جاتی ہوں، دربار میں یزید کے سر ننگے جاتی ہوں. ہے میرے مسافر کرب و بلا حسین، ہے میرے غریب میرے میلخا حسین. ہے تجھے نہ پانی کا خطرہ ملا حسین، ہے تمام تن تیرا ٹکڑے ہوا حسین. پیاسے گلے پہ خنجرے بے داد چل گیا، ہے تڑپ تڑپ کے تیرا دم نکل گیا، ہے تڑپ تڑپ کے تیرا دم نکل گیا. اے نینوا علی کی بضاعت تجھے ملی، اے کربلا خدا کی امانت تجھے ملی، اے خاک میری ماں کی ریاضت تجھے ملی، لے آئے زمین شم امامت تجھے ملی. دامن تیرا بھرا میری کھیتی اجڑ گئی، سرحد میں تیری بھائی سے زینب بچھڑ گئی، سرحد میں تیرے بھائی سے زینب بچھڑ گئی. مہماں بلا کے ہم سے دغا کی لعینوں نے، کیا کیا نہ ہم پہ جورو جفا کی لعینوں نے، کچھ بھی ذرا نہ شرم و حیا کی لعینوں نے، گردن خزا سے شیع کی جدا کی لعینوں نے. خیمہ جلا کے اہل ستم شاد ہو گئے، خیمہ جلا کے اہل ستم شاد ہو گئے، ہم کربلا میں آ کے برباد ہو گئے، ہم کربلا میں آ کے برباد ہو گئے. فریاد ہم غریبوں کی سنتا نہیں کوئی، کس سے کہیں جو ہم پہ مصیبت گزر گئی. چادر بھی منہ چھپانے کو منہ پر نہیں رہی، سر کھولے شہر شام میں آئی میں دل جلی. آدھا ہمیں دکھا کے سرے شہر رلاتے ہیں، آدھا ہمیں دکھا کے سر شہر رلاتے ہیں، اب سامنے شقی کے مجھے لے کے جاتے ہیں، اب سامنے شقی کے مجھے لے کے جاتے ہیں. زینب سے سن کے رونے لگے یہ ساکن شام، پھر اس طرح سے پیٹ کے سر کو کیے کلام. بتلاؤ اے ستم زدہ کیا ہے تمہارے نام، نیزوں کے نوکوں پر جو چڑھے ہیں یہ سر تمام. سردار اس میں کون ہے اور کس کے سر ہیں یہ، کس برج کے ستارے ہیں کس کے قمر ہیں یہ، کس برج کے ستارے ہیں کس قمر میں کس برج کے ستارے ہیں کس کے قمر ہیں یہ. بانوں نے دیکھ کر سر اکبر کو یہ کہا، 18ویں برس سے چھٹا مجھ سے میں لخا، کن کن مصیبتوں سے اسے میں نے پالا تھا، مجھ سے چھڑا کے لے گئی ایک آن میں خزا. جنگل بسایا گھر میرا ویران کر گیا، نیزہ جگر پہ کھا کے جوانی میں مر گیا. نیزہ جگر پہ کھا کے جوانی میں مر گیا. عباس کی یہ زوجہ پکاری بے اشک و آہ، سخا ابھی منا تھا سکینہ کا رشک ماں. دریا پہ لے گئی تھی بھتیجی کی آس کو چاہ، آدائے دین روکی تھی آ کر اسی کی راہ. یہ ہے نشاں علی کا نثار اس کی شان ہے، یہ ہے نشاں علی کا نثار اس کی شان کے شانے سے ہاتھ کاٹے گئے. شانے سے ہاتھ کاٹے گئے اس جوان کے. سر پیٹ کر یہ زینب بے کس نے پھر کہا، آگے سروں کے نیزے پہ جو سر ہے چاند سا، ہے یہ حسین ابن علی شاہ کربلا. نانا نبی اس کے ہیں اور ماں ہے فاطمہ، نانا نبی اس کے ہیں اور ماں ہے فاطمہ. مظلوم و بے وطن ہے یہ اور خستتن ہوں میں، بے غسل و بے کفن ہے وہ اس کی بہن ہوں میں، بے غسل و بے کفن ہے وہ اس کی بہن ہوں میں. صلوات.
محمد والے محمد صلوات. بآواز بلند صلوات.
نعرہ تکبیر، نعرہ رسالت،
یا رسول اللہ،
نعرہ حیدری، آواز بلند صلوات.
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد.
خوشنودی امام زمانہ بلند تر صلوات.
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. اعوذ باللہ السمیع العلیم من الشیطان اللعین الرجیم. بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم وبہ نستعین. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد. صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا بأبي عبد الله Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salatu wassalam. I offer my condolences to all you mu'mineen, mu'minat, as we continue the ayam of Azah and we continue to commemorate the sacrifice of Imam Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad and all of the shuhada of Karbala. And of course we continue this ayam of Azah by also focusing our commemoration, our Azah, our gham, our grief regarding especially the women and the children of the caravan of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. For this weekend that we have together, these 2 nights, I wanted to focus on a topic, if Allah gives us tawfiq, that it's likely a topic that, and a term that we all feel that we're probably already familiar with. But there's a lot of other dimensions that I think are important for us to maybe open up and see if there's more to it than we've already learned before. This concept of wilaya. Now, this is a concept that's probably the most important concepts for us as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, alayhimus salam. Other Muslims, right, the Ahlul Sunnah, they probably know of this concept, but they don't really pay it much attention. Right? It doesn't really have this focus and attention and power that it would have with you and I. For them, maybe wilayah is just about Allah being al-wali, and that's maybe where they stop. Maybe they continue with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And maybe they might refer to him as a wali, although in their normal language you don't hear them using words like wali and mawla necessarily, right? It's usually you and I who use this type of terminology. If you ask the average Shia, if you ask him to describe what wilayah means, that wilayah that starts from Allah as al-wali, one of his names, al-wali, then that wilayah, then he delegates and descends it down to all of the anbiya, right, with Rasulullah. And then from there, the divine appointment, as we all know very well, doesn't stop. It continues on with the Ahlul Bayt, with the Ayyimah alayhimus salam. So we all recognize all of these individuals as part of this system of wilayah. Now, we can translate it a lot of different ways, right? Maybe you'll say authority or guardianship, something like this. And typically, the average Shia, when they think about this idea of wilayah, they think about it in a very, call it a polemical fashion. And when I mean polemical, it means that this word has a special meaning in regards to, or in contrast to, the Sunni meaning of it. That's usually how we end up thinking about it. Meaning, when I'm talking about wilayah, I have a specific idea in mind that yes, wilayah belonged to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, and not to those other khulafa who ended up getting power. That's usually what we mean by wilayah, right? Authority, power, something like this, guardianship. Now, there's a few other points that I want to get to in this introduction before we go into the main part, but there's some points that I think are helpful for us to know. So, wilayah itself, from the root letters waw, lam, and ya, waliya, means anything that follows close. Anything that follows close behind something else, that's the sort of root meaning. You and I are usually used to this idea of wilaya with a kasra on the waw, right? Wilaya. Or in Urdu Farsi, wilayat, right? But there's actually two different ways and two different forms of this word, right? So there's wilaya that we're used to with the kasra, but if you add a fatha, it becomes walaya. That's actually arguably even a more important word, and maybe the actual meaning that we have in our mind, really, when it comes to the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, is probably that word. So there's a difference between wilaya with a kasra and walaya with a fatha. Again, probably Arabs probably don't even know this, to be honest. But only those who maybe have studied and looked at some of the riwayat and seen that the meaning of certain riwayat, the meaning will change based on, do you take this with a kasra or a fatha? Right? These things that obviously the ulama discuss. Alaykum salam. So we said wilaya, what is that? As we know, that means power, authority, guardianship. It has a very political meaning to it. Now, when I say that too, we're like, yeah, obviously that's the case because political authority rested and always will rest with the Ahlul Bayt and no one else. Okay, we know that. But when we think about the totality of the meaning and that connection that you and I want to have with the Ahlul Bayt, we know that it doesn't just stop with political leadership because, yes, maybe there are some from the Ahlul Sunnah or even Orientalists, non-Muslims sometimes will look at historical evidence. They'll say, yes, based on the evidence that we see, sure, it seems like Ali ibn Abi Talib should have been the leader. Okay, so they can come to that same conclusion. So you and I, there's no special fazilat and you and I recognizing Imam Ali as being the rightful Khalifa at that time. Because other people actually have recognized that too. Even Ahlul Sunnah, some of them, not all of them, not even the majority, a small group said, you know what, he probably would have been a better leader. Or maybe he did have more knowledge in fiqh and akhlaq or whatever it is. But this is how it worked out, so too bad, right? Kind of like that. So limiting this idea of our connection to the Ahlul Bayt and what has been granted to them by Allah to just political, that wilayah part, is actually doing some injustice to them. This is where the other part of walaya comes in, wilayah with the fatha. Wilayah with the fatha goes much closer to the root meaning of walaya, meaning to follow something closely. So walaya and walaya with the fatha is about this closeness in love and connection with another entity. So the walaya that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have has been granted to them because of the extreme love that they have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now, of course, the Ahlul Bayt have both of these, right? They have both, but usually we only end up mentioning one word because that's the normal word that we hear all the time. And I'm sure most of us know that if I didn't bring out these two discussions and bring out the two terms, we would have said, yeah, we know that the Ahlul Bayt, there's a political part of them that they have the haqq and they have the right. We know that. And also we know that they are the closest to Allah and His Rasul. We already know this. I just wanted to make sure that we understood there's actually two different terms for it. That's it. Why? Because this actually does change the meaning of some terms in the Quran and some terms in riwayat as well. Although that's not the focus that we want to do tonight, but this is just one example of how some ideas and concepts relating to wilayah, maybe you and I don't know yet. And we probably shouldn't. This concept, if it's going to be one of the most important concepts, right? We know from the riwayat, and I'm sure I don't have to tell all of you, we know that we have all of these, a whole section of riwayat in Al-Kafi that talk about the bunyad of Islam. And in nearly every single one of those riwayat, where it mentions, okay, Islam is founded on salah and this, in nearly every single one of those riwayat, one of those items that's mentioned is al-wilaya. So the ulama have a discussion, is that wilaya with a kasra or is it walaya with a fatha? If it's wilaya with a kasra, that seems like it takes away some of the fada'il of the Ahlul Bayt then. Because they argue that it's that walaya, that love, that connection that they have to Allah, that they are so close to Allah and His Rasul, it's as if there's no separation between them. That's what wilaya actually, or walaya actually means, to follow somebody that closely. It's because they are the ones that are that close, that's why they're granted wilayah in the first place. So these concepts all follow through from one another. And the other word, which hopefully most of you are also aware that comes from the same root, is, now in Urdu, we usually have been told to call it tawalla, right? In Arabic, it's actually pronounced tawalli, not a big deal. But this word tawalli or tawalla, however you decide to pronounce it, it's coming from the exact same root of walaya. So wilaya, walaya, and tawalli are all related words. So tawalli, we're usually, what we're taught is, okay, that means sending salawat and having, jashans or majlis, building our connection with the Ahlul Bayt. And that's absolutely true. But the type of connection that we're trying to build is following in that same system of walaya. Meaning, I need to perform, my niyat has to be proper, my words have to be appropriate, and my actions all have to lead to the same thing, which is that I have to have a sense of walaya within myself that brings me to the walaya of the Ahlul Bayt. If they're the ones that are closest to Allah and His Rasul, this tawalli that I'm performing, or tawalla, has to bring me to their wilaya so that I get close to them, so that I get a little bit closer to Allah. That's how the system works. So that's why one of the other ways that the idea of wilaya is described is hierarchy. Is that there's Allah, Anbiya or Rasul, and then Ahlul Bayt, and then anybody else who follows in their footsteps. This is how that system works. So that's the first part of the introduction that I wanted to go through. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, why I wanted to go through this, especially as we are still commemorating the Ayam of Azah, is because while we are remembering the message and the sacrifice of Karbala, while we are honoring those who stood with their Imam of their time and who fought the Yazid of their time, most of us know, okay, we want to make Karbala practical, right? I think most of us at this point, we realize that that's something that we have to start figuring out how to do. And one of the ways we do that is say, okay, well, I have an Imam of my time as well. There's a chance that when, inshallah, he returns, and may Allah hasten his reappearance, when he returns, I pray and I hope, and I really, really am hoping and praying that, yes, when he comes back, I'll be just like the companions of Imam Hussein, and I'll be with the Imam of my time. Is there any guarantee for any of us? No. We are hoping and praying, and hopefully we're acting in a way that, yes, it'll be the case, but we don't have those guarantees. And we can say very easily that, well, because of all these things that I've learned from the mimbar, all these durus, all these lessons, I come to these programs and Muharram and Majllis, Jashan, I'm learning enough that hopefully it'll bring me closer to the Imam when he returns. Maybe. What I would ask humbly for myself and for all of you is, what do you think makes you and I any different to those so-called Shias back then who were inviting and calling their Imam too? Those same ones who were writing letters to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, they had this same josh, this same ishq, this love and hub for their Imam. They're the ones who invited him and said, hurry, hurry, ajil, come to us. We'll support you, we'll defend you, we're ready for you. But when the Imam made his way, we see how quickly many of them betrayed him. Now again, I'm using the word Shia, not in the way that sometimes Sunni accuse the Shias of killing Imam Hussein. That's not what I mean here. I mean individuals who are calling for what they believe to be their Imam. Right? There's a historical discussion about why we wouldn't use the word Shia for all those individuals. If we have time, maybe some other session we can talk about that. But the way that you and I understand that what that word Shia means wouldn't be the same as those individuals in Kufa or Basra back then. It's a whole, different understanding, right? We want to make sure we are not the same as those people in Kufa or Karbala or whoever it was that stood against the Imam. Those who were crying to the Imam's face. Those who, when the caravan was going through Kufa, again, they were crying in front of the Imam. And in khutbah after khutbah, whether it was from Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, whether it's from Kulthum, whether it was from Imam Sajjad alayhi salam himself, all of them were saying, what's the point of your tears now? The blood of our family has already been shed. Your tears are meaningless at this point. I don't mean to diminish us and our tears and the Majllis and all this that we're doing. I don't diminish that at all. But at the same time, that is not going to be enough to give us najat and to bring us closer to the Imam of the time. So there's something else that we have to look into. Now, obviously, this is just 2 nights that we're going through. We can't go through a whole deep philosophical system and going through all these different proofs to figure out whether we're ready or not. I mean, we can't do that in 2 nights. This is a lifelong thing. But perhaps there's a key that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have left. Right? The whole reason that Allah has continued on the system of hidayat and guidance through the Ahlul Bayt is so that we're not left with these types of questions. That it would be unjust, na'udhu billah, for Allah to say, I'm going to leave you in a state of shak and doubt that you won't know whether or not you will be with the Imam that I sent. That would be a devastating thing for us to be in. So it seems that part of Allah's justice and His lutf, His mercy and His rahmah is to give us some system, some error checking, debugging system so that we can figure out, where do I lie in my sense of iman or being a fasiq? Am I a mu'min or not? Will I be with my Imam or not? Will I be against my Imam? Will I do khiyanat? What would I do? We might look different places to try to look at the characteristics of some of the individuals like Shimr or Muawiyah or Yazid or Amr ibn Sa'd, la'natullah alayhim ajma'in. That's one way you could do that, sure. But there's another way that we wanted to do, and that's by looking with a different lens at this concept of wilaya or walaya. And that's where we wanted to title this 2-night series, how even this idea of wilaya can serve as a system of education, an Islamic system of education. I don't mean that you take it and now you go into a class and you start teaching. No, that's not what I mean. Although I do mean that, but that's a separate discussion. What I mean is that this system that's been put in place, wilaya is not simply about you and I talking about the fadail of the Ahlul Bayt, although that's included. It's not just about crying or mourning or grieving when they are upset, although that's a part of it as well. Wilaya is such a powerful concept that it extends out to every other facet of our lives, including this testing system that exists within the system of wilaya. So let me explain a bit more. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So the next part of the sort of kind of introduction, and forgive me if this sounds overly simplistic, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. When we talk about any sort of educational system, there's basically 3 phases to any type of education that happens. It doesn't matter if you're talking about kindergarten, preschool, it doesn't matter if you're talking about anything else in grade school, college, you're going to a seminar, higher education, workshop, training, at the eldest or highest stages. Every sort of educational institution or session has the same sort of structure in place. And it's 3 basic phases. So what are they? So the first phase is basically your muqaddimah and your introduction. Typically what happens, a teacher or the professor or the instructor, they don't just walk in and start teaching right away. Right? Nobody does that. They come in and they usually introduce themselves. They share their name, maybe a little bit about their background. They'll mention the course. Maybe they'll mention the syllabus or the specific type of curriculum that's going to be used throughout the course. Maybe they'll talk about the goals, the purpose, the method, the methodology, all these basic ideas to get everybody in the same sort of frame of mind. And it makes sense. There are some people that if a teacher doesn't do all these things at the beginning, they'll be lost when the instruction actually starts. So it makes sense for them to lay out this framework at the beginning so that now everybody kind of follows along with the teacher, right? That's the idea. Now, once that phase is done, now you can move on to the main bulk of it, which is the actual ta'aleem and ta'allum and the instruction and education. Now the learning can actually take place. Now, obviously, the learning, in a very simplistic explanation, is here's a bunch of problems, and here's how you solve them. The idea is that a student who's coming into that classroom environment or that learning structure, they don't have the ability to solve it themselves. They may not even know what the problems are yet. So the teacher will show them, here are what the problems look like. The solutions you don't know, you don't even know how to solve them yet, so I'll show you how you can solve them, little by little. And the teacher will be there, hand in hand, to show you, this is how you use these tools. This formula, this instrument, whatever it happens to be, right? In any type of science, it's going to vary how it is. But this is how you start solving problems one by one. We start with the easy ones, and we move on to more difficult ones. But the teacher's there the whole time, right? The teacher is present the whole time. The teacher is assisting. Now, after that's done, that's the bulk of the time. Now, at the end of any sort of instruction period, what's supposed to happen at the end? A test, right? Questions, exam, test. Because the idea is that, okay, you are given an overview and instruction. You know what the goals and the purpose is. You're supposed to walk away with a certain amount of knowledge that we already told you about. We showed you how to solve certain problems. Now we need to know, can you do this on your own or not? Can you do it independently? So the teacher comes up with some sort of exam, questions, and then says, okay, here you go. It's pretty much the same thing that was already done in the instruction period, meaning the problems shouldn't vary at all. Right? Maybe the details are slightly different, but the nature of the problem shouldn't be shouldn't be the same. What the only difference at this point is during the instruction phase, the teacher is there and is walking hand in hand, but in the examination phase, the teacher is ghaib. They're not there. Maybe they're proctoring the test, but they're not answering for you anymore. They're not helping you anymore, because the idea is you have to solve this. If you solve it, if you pass it, you show proficiency in this, okay, now you get a choice. Either you get a certificate or whatever, or for when we first start off, the idea is I passed Algebra 1, the idea is now I get to go to Algebra 2, and then repeat the process over again. And for most of our education, that's the idea. You start with a basic form or science, you get instructed, you pass, and then you move on to the next one. Pass that, move on to the next one, and higher and higher. What we'll show, inshallah, is this same exact system exists within the lives of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam as well. This exact same system. Now, how are we going to do that? Right? And I have to prove it to you, obviously, with the few minutes that we have left. There's two different ways we can go about doing so. There's one where we try to find specific examples from the life of this imam or that imam or this imam. And we might be able to do that. It might be difficult with certain imams to do something like that. And that is one method that certain ulama use, is when they want to create an example, they want to create a model for us, they want to give us some life lesson, they'll stick to one imam. And they'll grab an example and they'll give it to everybody. I'm sure that might work. For this, it may not work. There's another way of analyzing the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, which has become much more famous recently, especially after that famous book was published by Shahid Khamenei, may Allah bless his soul, Insan de Visto Panja Saleh. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, right? The 250-year-old person. So this book, the theory was that the mistake that many of us make is that we take each ma'asum, each imam in isolation, where we should be looking at their life in totality. All of them, whether you say the 12 imams or even 14 ma'asumin, that all of them are working towards a singular goal. And if you look at them like this, then the picture changes. So you're not just micro-analyzing what each imam's doing, you're now macro-analyzing, and then with the macro-analysis, now the micro-analysis will change as well too, if that makes sense. So this method of now analyzing the imams like this, or taking kind of a higher bird's eye view, a macro view, changes the way that we look at the lives of the Ahlul Bayt. And for this, what we're trying to prove as wilaya being a system of education, this works with this sort of secondary system. Now, how we're going to do that is by dividing the lives of the imams into 3 distinct phases as well. So if you take 12 imams, divide them by 3, you get 4 imams per phase, right? 1st to 4th, 5th through 8th, and then 9th through 12th. So let me explain a bit more. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When we think about the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th imams, alayhimus salam, what jumps to our mind? Do we think about ahkam rulings? Do we think about education necessarily? Maybe you can find a hadith here and there, but that's not really what we remember from these imams. Yes, I'm sure you can find riwayat where they might mention a certain fiqh ruling, sure. But that's not the first thing that jumps to our mind. when we look at the lives of the first four Imams, what you really see is an emphasis on Tawheed. You have an emphasis on Nubuwwah and Risala. You have an emphasis on their Imamat specifically, sometimes reminding people about Ma'ad, Qiyamat, judgment and things like this as well. Or in other words, what are they focusing on? They're focusing on the Usul al-Din. What they're doing is introducing people, or putting it more precisely, they have to reintroduce Muslims to the basic fundamentals of Islam. Why? And we'll mention that probably not tonight, maybe tomorrow night. Is because they already had one teacher before. That teacher came, right? Khatam al-Anbiya wal-Mursaleen, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Did his duty perfectly. Itmam al-Hujjah, right? Ikmal al-Din, everything happened. Introduced, taught, everything. But the exam came at Ghadir and Saqifa, and what happened to the Muslims? They failed. So what happens when you fail? You don't get to go to the next phase. You don't get to go to the next class. You have to stay back and repeat the process over again. So with the first four Imams, largely what they're doing is saying, well, you missed out the first time, so now we have to reintroduce these concepts to you. You missed out on Tawheed, so we have to teach that to you again. You missed out on Nubuwwah, because clearly the people that you honor and venerate are the ones who disobeyed Rasulullah. So clearly you don't understand Nubuwwah and Risala. You didn't understand all the points about Imamat and Wilayat that was mentioned by Rasulullah, so we have to teach you about this again too. And you forgot about your own afterlife, your Ma'ad, your Qiyamat, so we have to tell this to you again as well. All these points they forgot, so of course they have to be retaught all these ideas. This is the Muqaddamah and the introductory phase for them. If they just came, first, second, third, fourth Imam, and just tried to teach the Ummah, do you think anybody would bother listening to them? No. When they tried to, the little bits that they tried, look in Nahjul Balagha, how much Mawla Ali had to struggle with his own so-called, his people. When he's the Khalifa, so-called Khalifa, right? And I say so-called because who was actually obeying him? Yes, he had a handful of supporters, and the Ummah came crying to him, saying, yes, let us become our Khalifa. He told them that you can't handle my insaf and my adala, you won't be able to handle this. The way that I want to do things is going to be a lot different than what you're used to. It's not going to work the same. And when he said, one of the first things I want to do is to stop Muawiyah, la'anatullah alayh, they weren't ready for it. All right? Look in the letters of Nahjul Balagha, these so-called men, he says that you're ashba'ur rijal, you're fake men. You look like men, but you're not really men. I command you to go and fight in the summer, you come and complain that it's too hot. I wait till it's winter, and then I tell you, okay, now it's cool, you say it's too cold now. Then I wait again for the next season, and you say, well, I don't want to fight with other Muslims. So this is what the people that he had to deal with. And this is where some of these words of Imam Ali, they seem strange, but it makes sense given the context of who he's dealing with. He says, I wish I had just 10 people like those ones who were loyal to Muawiyah. He has loyal soldiers to him, and he's like, I don't have these in my army. Had I had these individuals, had he had 5, 10 individuals with him, right, after Saqifa, then he could have taken his haqq back. But you see, every single time when Allah introduces a teacher, and that teacher tries to say that I'm here to teach you about Islam, the Ummah just abandons them. So what's the point of instruction at that point? So what you see with these Imams is they have to reintroduce themselves as teachers first, and say, we Ahlul Bayt, we are the ones who have been given this hidayat to give you hidayat. That's the whole point of this. If the system works for you, then you can start following our instructions. So this is where you see the culmination of this, especially with the sacrifice of Imam Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam in Karbala. And then the end of that phase is with Imam Sajjad, with Sahifa Sajjadiyah, with these du'as, and this very secretive form of sort of education / instruction that's happening. Although what is he doing? He's setting it up for the next phase that happens. What's the next phase? 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Imams. Now what happens over there? Right away, when we think of, at least for the 6th, but it should be all those Imams, this is the first time that any Shia now thinks about the idea of scholarship and education. And that's not by accident. It's because now they have been given the chance because the first four Imams set the stage for them. Why are people now flocking to Imam Baqir alayhi salam or Imam Sadiq alayhi salam? People will learn the furu' from them, furu' ad-din from them, because their usul has been set by their forefathers. That's why. So now, yes, these 4 Imams can now teach everybody. Whether Shia or Sunni, doesn't matter at that point. People will come to them and say, yes, you are, at the very least, you're an alim, so we'll follow you and we'll listen to you. Right? All of the 4 major madhahib, the Sunni schools of thought, in some way, shape, or form, owe their education back to Imam Baqir, Imam Sadiq, alayhi salam, right? Whether they know it themselves or not, that's a different point. Whether they spent a lot of time with the imam, it doesn't matter. They would not have had a real education had it not been for our imams. Okay. So now you see, where does principles of the Quran come out in the time of these imams? They're teaching people furu' ad-din, ulum al-Quran, fiqh, usul. All these concepts are now being introduced to the people there. Now, once the instruction's happening, saying, look, there's going to come a time that all these problems that we're telling you the solutions for right now, we won't be here anymore. We won't be in front of you anymore. We're teaching you that there are going to be a bunch of problems that you'll face, and there are ways that you can solve them as well. And now, once that phase is finished with the 8th Imam, you move on to the last phase, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. Introduction's been finished. Instruction is done. So what's the final phase? Examination. Test. And what was the key point for that? In an examination phase, the problems are still there. Somebody needs to offer the solution, but the teacher, are they hadir or are they ghaib? The teacher's supposed to be in ghaiba at that point. Now you might say, okay, but it's only the 12th Imam. Maybe. Yes, the 12th Imam has ghaibatul kubra, 100%, sure. But the other Imams, for those of us who know the history of the 9th, 10th, and 11th Imams as well, what is their lives if not but basically a ghaiba? How much interaction do they really have with their, with any Muslims? Right? Not much. And I'll share just one story just to, to bring home that point. This story comes from the life of Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salatu wasalam. We know that the 11th Imam, like his father and his grandfather before him, they were constantly being watched by the authorities. They were being taken from house arrest to imprisonments, in and out, they were moved. Right? So they were not free as the previous Imams were to just go and teach and talk to people. They were being watched constantly. They were being harassed. The Shias were being tortured. This is a very, very difficult time for the Imams and the followers of the Ahlul Bayt. One such incident that's reported in the books, which I'm sure you've heard before, is there were two companions that were there in Samarra. One of them had already met and seen the Imam before, so he knew what the Imam looked like. There was another companion who was visiting Samarra and had hoped that he had never seen the Imam. He says, I'm looking forward to seeing or meeting the Imam. So he came to one of the known Shias, right, this other companion. He said, you know what he looks like? Let me know. When you see him out there, tell me so that I can go and send my salams to him and greet my Imam. So the two are walking in the street one day, and that other companion said to him, look, the Imam doesn't come out very often. It's very, very rare, because he's being watched constantly. It's probably not going to happen. But if he does come out, I'll point him out to you. Anyway, they're walking in the street one day, and the Imam is actually out of his house. He's walking on the other side of the street. So the companion who recognizes him, he tells the companion, that is our Imam. That is Ibn Rasulullah. That's the Imam right there. So this companion is excited. He wants to go and run to the Imam. What would you do if you and I right now, if we found out the 12th Imam was walking across the street, the other side? We would drop everything. We would run across the street, wouldn't we? Just to say salam. So this companion he's excited. He's ready to just go run across. The Imam from the other side just stops and doesn't let him come and just continues on, doesn't even acknowledge either of them. So now he's heartbroken. Later on, he's able to come to a secret gathering, right? A very rare one. And they ask him about this. They say, why did you do that to us? Why didn't you let us come and say salam to you? He said, you didn't notice this, but all around there were people who are watching me. They're not just watching me, they are watching who comes and says salam to me. And when they find that out, they will know who are our Shia. And if they do that, they will torture you, they'll torture your family, and they'll come and torture me as well too. So out of protection for you, for myself, and for Islam, you can't even come and say salam to me. Just ignore me and move on. If this is not ghaiba, I don't know what is. We would almost say, with due respect, what's the point of an Imam walking around in front of us if you can't even say salam to him? That's pretty much a ghaiba. Or another point, most of us hopefully are familiar. When we commemorate the shahada of the 11th Imam, when the musibah is recited, there's hardly anything that's actually recited. Right? There's maybe a few words here and there. And then typically the zakir or the alim will quickly make some connection to Karbala. That's usually where they spend a lot of time on the musibah. And this happened once, a few years ago. And afterwards, one of the brothers came to me and said, look, Sayyid, it's, there's nothing wrong, obviously, about mentioning Karbala and connecting that. He's like, I get that, and it always breaks our heart to hear that, and that's fine. And I'm sure the Imams would always think about Karbala. He's like, but I would have preferred if we could have heard more about the musibah and the final moments of the shahadat of the 11th Imam. He's like, why didn't you do that? And I had to tell them what pretty much any other alim who wants to be, faithful to history would say, is that if you have any information, then you can share it with us. Because we don't have that kind of information. This is the kind of ghaibah that the Imam is in. The sort of tanha'i, the loneliness, that people didn't have access to the last final moments. We don't have a lot of information about the 11th Imam or even the 10th Imam. There's just a few stories. If I ask any of you right now, how many stories of those final Imams can you actually share? Okay, there's this one mu'jizah here, or again, some fight with a Christian, and that's kind of it. We don't have a lot of stories and information. You look in history books, there's a small amount. These authors, to their credit, they do their best to fill up these books with fada'il and what they think might have happened, but in terms of actual credible history, there's not a lot of information. Why? For many reasons. One of them, because of that house arrest, because of the imprisonment, because people are being watched. Nobody's with their imam. So how can they note these things down? Or even if things are noted down, perhaps the imam saying, do not let this get out because this can become a difficult thing for us. And then as you move on in the future, books are getting burnt as well too. Books are being hidden. So this final phase, although you might think that it's only the 12th Imam who's in ghaibah, but starting from the 9th, 10th, and 11th, they are all in some level of ghaibah as well too. It starts with a small level of intensity with the 8th Imam as they shift over to that final phase, as he's taken to Khurasan. When he's there, he's surrounded by so-called Shias, so to speak, people who love him, but what can he do there? People think that he's on the side of Ma'mun, la'natullah alayh. This is how, foolish the Muslims were back then. That he's taken from his home and they don't do anything about it. That's a ghaibah. What's the point? And then with the 9th, it becomes more intense. With the 10th Imam, more intense of a ghaibah. 11th, much more intense until then you shift to ghaibatul sughra and then finally ghaibatul kubra. All this is happening in a very, linear, logical sort of fashion based on the actions of the Muslims and the so-called Shias around the Imams. What really can an Imam do if there are no Shias to actually support them and act as followers for them? What can they really do? There's not much. So, this system, that final test of ghaibah is really what? It's a test that completes this whole system that we wanted to talk about of wilayah. We talked about this, educational system, which is an introduction, an education, and then a test. Wilayah is all of this and more. What is wilayah? In that first phase, what are the Ahlul Bayt doing? They're introducing themselves and part of the system of wilayah. In the second phase, they have to teach people about what wilayah actually is. That based on this authority that we have been given Allah, this is the only individuals who can speak about the Quran. This is how you understand and derive laws based on usul al-fiqh and other principles. Right? This is how you understand the fada'il of the Ahlul Bayt. Right? So they start to explain all these things to them. So that's the education based on their wilayah. And then the final phase, that third phase, this is what ghaibat means and how you have to act within the system of wilayah. Because yes, even though that imam might not be directly in front of you, there will always be somebody either directly or indirectly appointed after them to follow in our footsteps. And even during that final phase, even before that actually, but especially in that final phase of the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, especially with the 12th, they were nominating and telling people that you're not going to have access to us. You can contact so-and-so faqih in Basra. If you're from Najaf, you ask this person. If you're from Tus, ask this person. You don't need to write letters to us. You don't need to come to us all the time, especially when it's going to be dangerous for you. People ask about, where is this idea of taqleed? Just read a history book and you'll see where it is. This was done right from the beginning. This is not some brand new concept that was made up by the Safavids or anything else, right? Only people who don't know their history would say something like that. This was there at the time of the Ahlul Bayt. And many even say that even at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And more details about that we'll talk about tomorrow night. So, ghaibah, that system of ghaibah is that there's going to be somebody here that's going to test you. Somebody will proctor this test on our behalf. Your test for this system of wilayah will be, how do you act with them? How do you treat them? If you can pass this test, then bismillah, you get to the next level of Islam and Iman. If not, then the whole process has to be repeated again. This is this system of education that we call wilayah. This is how the Ahlul Bayt have introduced us. Now, what we want to talk about tomorrow night, inshallah, is show, because, I've mentioned it in a general way with the Ahlul Bayt, we want to talk about how it's first been implemented. Because you might say, this sounds nice, but can we find this with Rasulullah? So I'll show that example tomorrow. Beyond that, we can actually show this example in the Quran to some degree as well. In the very first story, if we're thinking about time and what the first story is in the Quran, the first story of the Quran, we'll talk more about that tomorrow, but it seems like it's talking about the same idea as well. And then we'll give a few other examples, and then the final example will be, of course, how this finally was manifested in Karbala as well. How wilaya is that main guiding principle, that main educational principle, and the main testing principle at every single unique moment in history, every single time. We might think it's something else. We might think it's some akhlaqi issue or spiritual issue or political issue. And sure, zahiran, that's what it apparently looks like. But if you look with a batani lens, then it's always this idea of wilaya that's sitting behind everything. If the Ahlul Bayt, as we said in the beginning, are telling us that Islam is founded upon the idea of wilaya, then there has to be a lot more to it than you and I have been taught. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. From the beginning of Muharram till the Ashra, our minds and our hearts, they focus and they think only of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, the shuhada, his companions, his brothers, his children, all those who gave their lives on that afternoon. But from Sham-e-Ghariban afterwards, it's in a sense where we say Khudafis to Hussein, and now our hearts break for Zainab, for Kulthum, for Sakina, for all the women and children who are going through this much more difficult jihad. Karbala wouldn't be in our hearts and minds had it not been for the women and children, for Imam Sajjad to carry on this message to you and I. Had they not spread it to everyone else, had they not stood up to Ibn Ziyad, to Yazid, gone back to Medina, complained at every single place, recited their khutbahs, all these things they had done along the way, then Karbala would have vanished from the pages of time. And this is why, as much as we shed tears for those men who gave their lives in Karbala, a part of us might even rationalize that, yes, when men go out to battle, when they go out to a battlefield, there's a chance they will lose their lives. And yes, there's a chance that it might be vicious and horrible how they lose their lives if their enemy is vicious and torturous and evil, as the army of Umar ibn Sa'd la'natullah alayhi was. But these are things that we could say are expected of battle. But the treatment of the family of Rasulullah, the women of Rasulullah, the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of Rasulullah, this treatment is unheard of. This is why our heart breaks so much more when we hear their stories. Right there from Sham-e-Ghariban, as these women and children who are not there and not meant to watch battle take place, you see that they are now meant to see things, to witness things, to experience things that no person, no man, let alone woman or child, should ever experience. Now they have to experience. It begins immediately as they have to watch, as Umar ibn Sa'd gives his first order and asks, do I have any volunteers to ride their horses over the body of Hussein? 10 individuals quickly volunteer, and they ride back and forth over the body of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Now, mu'mineen, mu'minat, sometimes when we picture Karbala, sometimes when we think about it, we try to visualize maybe what some of these things were. I know they break our heart to think about it. But have you ever thought about Sakina being in her tent, waiting and thinking about what was happening outside? Hears the sound of horses moving back and forth, hearing the sound of bones being broken over and over again. Do you understand what this could have done to the heart of Sakina, of a young girl on a battlefield like this? After Umar ibn Sa'd gives this order, and after they have done this, then they begin to take the heads of each individual one by one, in a manner that no Muslim should ever have to deal with. These heads are now raised on spears. Then the next order is given. He allows these men to go into the tents of the women and children of Rasulullah. He says, take whatever you wish. They run into the tents. They begin grabbing everything that they like. They grab the clothes off of the women's back. When they grab the jewelry off of these young girls, when this man is crying in front of Sakina. He's crying to the daughter of Imam Hussein. And this young daughter of Imam Hussein saying, "Oh man, why are you crying as you are stealing this from me?" He says that I know that I shouldn't be doing this. He said, then why are you doing it? Because if I don't do it, then somebody else will. So I have to be the one to do this. This is the evil that's in the heart of these individuals. If this wasn't bad enough, then the final order is given on that night where he says, now you can burn the tents of these individuals. They set fire to the tents one by one. The women and children are being gathered. Zainab, Kulthum are gathering these children one by one as they are running back and forth scared. They have never been alone in this situation. Perhaps this is where they're all calling out, Abbas, Abbas, you left us alone here. You were with us in Medina. You helped us get on our horse. You protected us in every moment. This is where we need you the most right now, where these soldiers are here. We have no one to help us and support us and defend us. They are being taken now from one burning tent to the next tent. That tent is set on fire. They're moving around. The children are running around. Their clothes are on fire. The women are trying to put these fires out. Some of the children die there because they are lit on fire. Finally, they all come into one final tent where they see Imam Sajjad laying down. This Bimar Imam is there, trying to be now the first time as he is the Imam now. Bibi Zainab has to ask for the first hukum, the first fatwa from this Imam, saying, do we stay in here, oh my Imam? Do we stay in this tent and burn and lose our lives, or do we go outside and be looked upon by men in a way that we've never been looked at before? I've never had anybody's eyes look at me like this. Do we go outside without our chadar like this before? He says, oh Auntie Zainab, you are alama ghayr muallama, you know much better than me. You have to go, we have to save our lives. Now with Zainab saving Imamat, as she takes the body of Imam Sajjad, she takes out the mattress from the tent. That final tent is burnt down. This night of Shami Ghariba is over. But the difficulties of the Ahlul Bayt do not end over there. When the next morning, the next afternoon comes, now some of these women and children have been able to rest. And now Umar ibn Sa'd wants to now take these women and children to Kufa. But as the last form of torture, he decides to put them on camels without any sort of covers, without any sort of saddles. He takes Imam Sajjad, who is still ill, who's still weak. He ties him together. He puts chains around his hands. He puts a collar around his neck. He ties his hands around that collar on his neck so that his hands cannot move. The Imam is unable to move his hands. He's unable to move his neck. He's being burnt by the sand, by the heat of Karbala over and over and over again. And the final form of torture, now once everyone is tied together, they are now made to parade and go through and see the bodies, the headless bodies in Karbala. And as they're being taken through this, they say that this is now the first time they are all looking at the body, the headless body, the broken body of Imam Hussein. When Bibi Zainab sees this, perhaps it's because she saw the pale face of Imam Sajjad looking at the body of his father. She collapses on the body of Imam Hussein. Wa Muhammada, wa Muhammada. They say that she cried so much and complained so much, even the enemies began to cry and their hearts became broken. But I said, if even the hearts of the enemies broke and they began crying because of Bibi Zainab, then what do you think happened when Sakina saw for the first time the body of Imam Hussein and began crying, Baba, Baba? لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. ماتم حسين.
क्या ढूंढ रही है जंगल में सकीना अब्बास के बाजू या बाबा का सीना क्या ढूंढ रही है जंगल में सकीना अब्बास के बाजू या बाबा का सीना कानों से छिने गौहर और आग थी दामन में घबराई हुई बच्ची ये कहती रही रन में है कोई जो मुझको पहुंचा दे मदीना क्या ढूंढ रही है جنگل میں سکینہ عباس کے بازو یا بابا رن سے علی اصغر کو لے آؤ میرے بابا سونا نظر آتا ہے بھائی کا میرے جھولا اصغر کے بغیر اب مجھ کو نہیں جینا کیا ڈھونڈ رہی ہے جنگل میں سکینہ عباس کے بازو یا یہ شام کے زندہ میں دیواروں کو تکتی ہے کیا سوچ کے یہ جانے دن رات سسکتی ہے بچھڑی ہے چچا سے جب سے یہ حسینہ کیا ڈھونڈ رہی ہے جنگل میں سکینہ عباس کے بازو یا دنیا سے سدھارے ہیں بھائی جو میرے پیاسے جب تک نہیں لوٹیں گے امو میرے دریا سے میں نے اے پھوپھی جان پانی نہیں پینا کیا ڈھونڈ رہی ہے جنگل میں سکینہ عباس کے بازو یا بابا کا سینہ
اس وقت جب کہ زینب دربار میں گئی تھی قاری نمازیوں سے محفل سجی ہوئی تھی ظالم یہ پوچھتا تھا غازی تیرا کہاں ہے بالوں سے منہ چھپائے زینب یہ کہہ رہی تھی اے میرے بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان سر چھپاؤں کہاں اے میرے بابا جان
ہو رہی ہے اذان سر چھپاؤں کہاں
مجمع عام میں بے وطن بے امان آ گیا کارواں اے میرے
بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان سر چھپاؤں کہاں
بابا جان میرے دا مانگتی رہ گئی بام و در سج گئے جیتے جی مر گئی حلقہ شام میں نام سن کر میرا مر گیا ناتواں اے میرے
بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان سر جھکائے کہاں
ہاتھ کانوں پہ ہے نیل گالوں پہ ہے اور نشان جو سکینہ کے شانوں پہ ہے ہر نشان سے یہی آ رہی ہے صدا، بابا جان بابا جان اے میرے
بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، سر جھکاؤں کہاں؟
بابا جان یہ تیرا آخری تھا بیان، تیری چادر بچائے گا غازی جوان، مر گیا با وفا چھن گئی ہے ردا، کہتی ہے بیویاں اے میرے
بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، سر جھکاؤں کہاں؟
رک نہ پایا میرے با وفا کا وہ سر، نوک نیزہ سے آنے لگا خاک پر، بہن کو در بدر دیکھ کر ننگے سر، سہ نہ پایا جوان اے میرے بابا جان،
ہو رہی ہے سر جھکاؤں کہاں؟
کل تھی ماں آج میں بھی ہوں دربار میں، مثل سہارا کھڑی ہوں میں اغیار میں، اس طرف ہے شکی اس طرف رہ گئے بے پدر بیٹیاں اے میرے بابا جان، ہو رہی ہے
السلام علیکہ یا ابا عبداللہ، السلام علیکہ یا نبی اللہ، السلام علیکہ یا امیر المؤمنین و سید الوسین، السلام علیکہ یا خدیجۃ الکبریٰ، السلام علیکہ یا فاطمۃ زہرہ سیدۃ النساء العالمین، السلام علیکہ یا حسن مجتبیٰ، السلام علیکہ یا حسین شہید کربلا، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ یا غریب الغربہ، السلام علیکہ یا معین الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیکہ یا شمس الشموس انیس النفوس بعرض توس، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ یا صاحب عصر والزمان، الامان 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 من فتنة الزمان، السلام علیکہ یا شریک القرآن، السلام علیکہ یا امام انس والجان، اجر اللہ تعالی فرجک وسہر اللہ مخرجک وظہورک، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم، اللہم کل ولیک الحجت ابن الحسن عسکری صلواتک علیہ وعلی آبائہ فی هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك طوعا وتمتع فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين، اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد۔
مومنین یہ اعلان سماعت فرما لیجیے، یہ صرف مومنین کے لیے ہے کہ ایک مجلس ازا فرحان زیدی مرحوم عرفان زیدی صاحب کے گھر پر کسمی میں منعقد ہو رہی ہے، جو کہ کل سنڈے، اس کو نہیں، کمنگ سنڈے کو جو ہے اس کے بعد والے سنڈے کو یہ مجلس منعقد ہوگی، جو کہ ظہر عصر کی نماز ہوگی، اور وہاں پر مجلس منعقد ہوگی۔ اس مجلس سے مولانا رضوان رضوی صاحب خطاب فرمائیں گے۔ تمام مومنین سے شرکت کی درخواست ہے۔ بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔